Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, Greg Baise, the president and CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, gives an address titled Illinois' Wake-Up Call, Government is Closing Illinois One Day at a Time, in which he outlines how state policies are hurting manufacturing jobs. Then in about 25 minutes from now, former Governor Pat Quinn offers his own legislative redistricting plan that he says will pass the muster of the state constitution. Following that, in about 50 minutes from now, Governor Rauner gives an address on his reform agenda, job creation, and the need for term limits. And finally, in about 1 hour and 10 minutes from now, we sit down for a one-on-one interview with former New Mexico Governor and current Libertarian presidential candidate Gary Johnson as he discusses his economic policy, why a wall on America's southern border won't work, the war on drugs, and his completed expeditions to climb the highest mountains on each of the 7 continents. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm Phil Garnett, President of the Illinois Coal Association. Illinois is blessed with an abundance of coal. In fact, coal lies under 65% of Illinois land, and coal is used to provide half of the nation's energy needs, abundant and domestic. With energy independence at the top of our national agenda, Illinois coal mines, like the one here in Williamsville, must be part of our national discussion on energy. That's why the Illinois Coal Association supports the work of the Illinois Channel. Their extensive coverage of the role Illinois coal plays in meeting America's energy needs is a valuable contribution to informed discussion on a serious issue, such as the Illinois Channel's coverage of the FutureGen project, which holds the promise of environmentally friendly use of coal, or the Illinois Channel's unedited, in-depth interview with Fred Palmer of Peabody Energy. Serious coverage of serious issues. That's the Illinois Channel. You keep up the good work, and we'll keep watching.
Next, from the City Club of Chicago, Greg Baise, the president and CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, gives an address titled Illinois' Wake-Up Call, Government is Closing Illinois One Day at a Time, in which he outlines how state policies are hurting manufacturing jobs. This runs about 35 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I made the comment, a couple of my friends that were here, we had to get lunch started early because guys our age want to be able to eat dinner early, so we did that. It is also nice to see a lot of old friends from eras gone by and good friends that I work with, and I really appreciate them coming out today. Before I begin today, I want to draw your attention to these numbers. If there's anything that you recall from the day, just remember these, and I'll talk about them just a little bit later. As I told Jay, it was almost 10 years ago, September, I think it was 16, 2006, I stood on this very podium and began my speech with this quote. Since 2000, Illinois has been facing a perfect storm for its industrial base. Economic downturns from natural cycles were severely worsened in 2001 when Mad Ben flew planes into the World Trade Center. The ensuing economic downturn seemed to be the epicenter in this state, especially the manufacturing base. We lost nearly 200,000 jobs since then. If it was an Illinois city, it would be the second largest city in Illinois. Those were good paying jobs. But there was no outrage, there was no concern at the time. No one seemed to be bothered. Again, that was 10 years ago. I'm tempted, Paul, to be able just to take that speech out today, pass it around. We'll adjourn rather quickly, go across to the Irish bar, and you can buy the first round of drinks.
We got blonde Guinness. Not that I know.
Not that you know. My friends, what the hell is going on in Illinois? The jobs numbers are worse. More than 300,000 manufacturing jobs are now gone. Our pension system is further in debt. We've suffered through another recession. We've impeached the governor and convicted him. We've raised the state income tax and then we lowered it. We have nearly $10 billion in backlogs and bills that aren't being paid on time. And the pension debt is eating up nearly 20% of the state's revenue base. Ladies and gentlemen, government is closing Illinois one day at a time in this state. I'm here today to give notice and give voice to the frustration of my members, some of which are here today. My chairman, Bill Hickey, of a third-generation steel company, along with other board members, are gathered here today. And I'm here to give voice to what I hear from them every day, every week. They've had it. Many of them won't take it anymore. They aren't necessarily fleeing the state in droves, but many have left, and some instead are just not expanding here when the opportunity or the need arises. They look elsewhere. Before I go into details, let me say there is plenty of blame to go around for this cause. The problems have worsened over the past decade, I believe, because of a lack of executive leadership. We have had no real debate or discussion on the core structural problems facing this state and the employers of this state until Bruce Rauner was elected. As Pogo, and for you younger members of the audience, a comic strip from post-World War II said, we have seen the enemy, and it is all of us. I have seen year after year General Assemblies run by Republicans and Democrats alike pass the buck on serious problems facing this state. From decisions not to fund pensions, to letting state obligations grow, causing vendors to wait on payments only to be mollified by a 1% interest a month on their overdue bills. They have ignored the raising or the rising property taxes in counties across the state. They've added to the sales tax that allows us to have the dubious honor right here in Cook County of having the highest sales tax in the country. Today is a shout from the top of the roof. It is a plea to stop the direction that we are headed. We are destroying one of the state's most important economic sectors, and we are losing ground and high-paying jobs that go with it. The laughingstock that is Illinois is not funny to my members, and it should not be funny to the governing class. Almost every day, and certainly every week, I hear the same refrain from my members. My plan is to move my company. I will not invest another dollar here. I want to make sure my kids don't have this company to run in this state. And as Jim Bodman, the CEO of Vienna Beef, said this weekend in the Tribune, the state of Illinois is just very difficult to deal with because they don't have any money. We are caught in a position where we, as citizens, owe so much money to the pension debt, we will never get ahead. It would be easy to pack up and leave Chicago and Illinois. We could be a much more profitable company in Wisconsin. A terrible indictment. When I first began my jobs in government in 1977, Illinois was viewed by many as a land of opportunity. Agriculturally rich, robust manufacturing, strong educational institutions, great transportation corridor, hardworking middle class. The notion of Indiana being a major competitor for our jobs was laughable. Today they put up billboards laughing at us. Now people talk about how the middle class is in trouble, and it is. They are not lying when the politicians repeat that phrase over and over. But some of those who talk the loudest about protecting the middle class are actually doing more to push it out of existence. For decades, manufacturers have been the best producers of middle-class jobs in the nation. People from all walks of life look to manufacturing for jobs that paid good middle-class wages, offered health insurance, pension plans, an ability to educate your children and raise a family. For too many in this state, those days are gone. What I'm describing now is how many of my members feel, and man, do they feel it. And please keep in mind that about 85% of my members are small and medium-sized companies that are second or third generation owned. They feel that slowly but insidiously government is being led by politicians who who think they're the experts in running business, or in how to run a business. They see government dictating wages and opportunity, mandating nearly every aspect of how to run a business, and too often view employers as an eternal piggy bank. But how to solve every woe in society, they know how to do it. Since 2000, Illinois politicians have added 4,709 pages of laws. That's how many. Additional, lots of regulations and rules that take up additional books like that businesses large and small, retailers, financial experts, and others have to follow in operating in a business like here in the city of Chicago or Illinois. Two of the most oppressive governmental units, I believe, to employers in the nation. My members see great irony in these units of government trying to tell them how to operate when they seemingly can't even operate their own shop. Now, there is no doubt that manufacturing creates wealth in this country, the type of wealth that offers chance for the middle class to have security. But as industry leaves this state, we also see a disappearing middle class. It's not a coincidence, it's the cause. How about some facts? Now, I know facts shouldn't get in the way of a good story, but on January 1st, 2000, for example, 6,008,000 people were employed in Illinois. Last month's statistic, 6,013,000. Net increase of 5,000. And that's typical of the steady stream of bad news that we're experiencing. An ironic moment occurred in 2006. That was the day that the Rubicon was crossed when the Department of Employment Security noted that 844,000 people were employed by government, only 841,000 in manufacturing. That was for the first time that had ever occurred since World War II, and the gap has been widening ever since. Since Illinois manufacturing has lost approximately, or since 2000, Illinois manufacturing has lost over 304,000 jobs. At the start of the millennium, 877,000 people, now 573,000. And if the multiplier effect is created or says that 1.5 jobs are created for every manufacturing jobs, literally hundreds of thousands of jobs have disappeared or were never created. And it's happened across the state. The Chicagoland MSA, 39%, almost 40%. Rockford, 26%, Peoria, the same. The Quad Cities, 20%, Decatur, 18%. Adding up to 33% of the manufacturing employment lost in the state during that time period. Could there be a correlation between these numbers and the woeful decline of the middle class in this state? These are not faceless statistics. Each of these 304,000 people, they had a name, they had a family, they had hopes and dreams. But for too many, those have now become nightmares. Now some of those jobs went away because of market pressures, increases of productivity and automation. Manufacturers are actually at their very best when it comes to adapting to the change in technology and producing technology gain or productivity gains. As of 2014, the median income in this state was $57,444. When you compare that figure to a typical manufacturing wage with benefits and health care, it's a compensation package of over $75,000. Many of the people who have lost their manufacturing job or simply cannot find another one have to resort to whatever is available, which too often is a traditional minimum wage position. A job maybe that was created to be designed as an entry-level spot, at least temporary, not permanent. And of course, government officials who are very good at treating the symptom instead of curing the disease ignore the culpability in driving jobs away and instead attack those employers for not offering higher wages or increasing benefits. The truth is, the outrage shouldn't be focused on minimum wage employers, but instead a political system that has turned the economy upside down. The better fix is to let's start creating $75,000 a year jobs, not $31,000 a year, which is what the Fight for 15 creates. So it's harder for Illinois workers to get into the middle class today. As generational employment of the middle class has gone, the ripple effects of these barriers have a devastating effect on individual outcomes, communities, and our overall state economy. We keep hearing the call for return to middle class values, or the middle class is being destroyed. But tell me, what policies have we really enacted in this state to grow and revitalize our middle class? Name one. It's hard to do. Now let's be clear. A change in a tax policy or regulatory obstacles will not jolt the system immediately into increasing manufacturing levels back to pre-2000. Even with the job losses we have suffered during the last decade and a half, Illinois manufacturing still produces 12% of the state's GDP, nearly the same as it was at that time. But if we are to compete for the advanced manufacturing operations that are being developed today and built, the digital and 3D manufacturing plants that you see around the world, we must change Illinois' trajectory. So it's time, I believe, to drastically change our philosophy. It's time to restore some common sense into the public policy arena, and I'm going to propose a few agenda items, a middle-class manufacturing agenda that people in Springfield ought to seriously think about. First, God, we must get the state's fiscal house in order. The irresponsible spending and the lack of balanced budgets have caused businesses to rethink their plans for expansion or capital expenditures, close or reduce their level of workforce. Businesses crave predictability. That is why we need to get spending under control. We must balance the state's budget. We must make necessary changes and adopt meaningful pension reform and do it right away. Where in any world does a $100 billion pension obligation be explained away by its Constitution? If the Constitution has to be amended, then I implore our leaders to solve this problem. The elected leadership on both sides of the aisle should get about the business of doing it. A constitutional provision that was drafted in 1970 cannot and must not bankrupt this state. And to a point that was made of what occurred last week, that the decision made by the Supreme Court that threw out the opportunity to change the legislative maps only increases the cynicism that many feel in living in this state. Second, it is time that we enact some meaningful and permanent workers' compensation reforms. Now, I know most of you have heard me speak before begin to nod off at this point and say, oh yeah, we hear about that all the time. Change workers' comp, we know that that's what it means. Take benefits away from injured workers. But does it make sense that Illinois employers are forced to pay an average compensation of $439,000 for an arm injury, when the national average is $169,000? Is it logical for doctors who get paid $2,500 for a rotator cuff operation under Medicare turns around and charges $7,856 for the same exact surgery when it's paid for by the work comp premium or insurance policy? And is it fair for the employer to be on the hook for 100% of the cost of an injury when they are not the primary or even the major cause of the accident? Illinois has the 7th highest workers' compensation cost in the country. Moreover, higher worker comp costs remain one of the top issues that deter businesses of all sorts from growing, locating, or expanding businesses here. Higher work comp costs have driven more jobs from Illinois than any other misguided policy, and therefore disproportionately contributed to our middle class vanishing. Note, the overall goal of the system is still the same: to make sure that an injured worker gets back to work as soon as possible or is compensated appropriately for the loss of anything the injury may have caused. But at what point do our elected leaders push back on the union leaders, the trial bar, medical professionals, and the myriad of other interests that feed off this system and finally say, enough? Third, tax reform. Any tax expert will tell you that we need to have a fair, broad-based tax system. And if more people are paying taxes and businesses are creating jobs, more revenue will stream into the state's coffers. I believe we must modernize and make permanent the research and development tax credits, along with manufacturing purchase credit and graphic arts exemption. Illinois policymakers have allowed these exemptions, which most every other state has or completely eliminates, that they have allowed them to be sunset 4 times in the last 13 years. These credits work, they create middle-class jobs, they send a strong signal to employers in the state and also to the country that Illinois is welcoming to business. Research and development is the lifeblood of manufacturers that must constantly create new and improved products that compete in the marketplace. The average R&D job in Illinois is over $100,000 in pay to its workers. A state that is a leader in pharmaceutical and advanced manufacturing should not go one day without that particular credit. The Illinois estate tax is punitive and is driving companies out of this state. It negatively impacts small and medium-sized manufacturing companies as well as farmers in the agriculture world. It hurts families where the business has been 3 or 4 generations. Illinois needs to repeal the estate tax, as California has, or at a minimum tie it to the federal exemption. When wealth flees the state, or our long-term future is damaged. Now, I believe that the IMA and the business community could support additional revenue, but if and only if Illinois leaders take the necessary steps to enact meaningful and permanent economic development reforms and fiscal reforms. Simply pouring more money into the broken system is not acceptable. And finally, Illinois leaders need to at long last, tackle the patently unfair, overtly political property tax system in Cook County. For decades, politicians have kowtowed to the residents, the homeowners, by keeping property taxes arbitrarily low while shifting the tax burden onto the commercial and industrial taxpayers in this county. Remember that earlier chart showing nearly 40% of the manufacturing jobs lost in the Chicago MSA? Friends, this is your culprit. And if things aren't bad enough, there is a looming problem that has been grossly underreported. Manufacturers and companies in general are facing a severe skills gap as baby boomers retire. Nearly 300,000 manufacturer workers will retire in the next decade. We need to replace 5,000 engineers, 25,000 production workers each and every year just over the next 10 years to be able to keep up. We need to encourage students who like to make things to view manufacturing as a career choice. Companies that cannot find skilled workers will move on. Now, maybe some of you may find that I'm painting an exaggerated picture about some of the dire times that we face in this state. Well, let me just take you through a little drive around Illinois to remind you of things. Driving through communities like my old hometown of Jacksonville, it's hard to miss the empty skeletons of old factories that reflect numbers cited above. Jacksonville and towns like Decatur, Peoria, Rock Island, reflect of a tired image of an era gone by. With manufacturing gone, retail and other commercial interests have also disappeared. Drug and crime levels have increased as communities have seen their younger populations leave. Now, fortunately, there are places and bright spots around the state. Our good members at Chrysler and Ford are adding employees, and we see full parking lots and facilities in the southeast side of Chicago or Belvedere. But finally, an image of the way it used to be can be quickly found by driving just a few moments away from those facilities. The empty manufacturing and retail that dots all across our state in small town and in the urban areas of Chicago. I worked for Governor Thompson during a time when we have last attracted a large manufacturing facility, a new plant, Mitsubishi, located in Bloomington Normal. Unfortunately, it has fallen victim to the competitive marketplace. Do we really think, though, that under the current climate, Bloomington Normal can attract another auto manufacturer to that location? It has been 30 years since we have been able to attract a large facility like that with all the great attributes and things that we have to offer. Illinois must rebuild and support its manufacturing base. We must do it in order to prosper and grow as a state. It was once the backbone of our economy, and because of policy failures, I believe, we have let the firm foundation crumble around us. Innovation, growth, new products, new jobs, revitalized communities or more importantly, a thriving middle class, are all possible again. There are policy solutions we can explore to bring industry back to Illinois. Among those I've cited, work comp, pension reform, meaningful approach to taxes and regulation, which start us in the right direction. But when opponents reject these ideas or push back, it is time that all of us ask them a question. Tell us, how well has this current policy been working? The numbers paint a very, very dire picture. A manufacturing rebirth in Illinois should be a top priority on all of our lawmakers' minds in both the executive and the legislative branch. I hope to see a revitalized middle class in this state that begins to take advantage of many of the benefits that we have. We are well positioned in this country to be able to do it. And I hope this discussion that we are now beginning to have will spark, yes, outrage, I guess is the word, being upset that this has occurred, that we have just let it go on without asking the hard questions. So just remember as you leave, remember these numbers. Wisconsin has created 44,000 jobs in manufacturing in the last 7 years. Ohio has created 75,900 jobs. Indiana, 83,700. Michigan, 171,000. Illinois, 4,600. Hell, even Idaho created 9,100. Unfortunately, it's abysmal, my friends. It's pathetic. It's time for a change in philosophy and direction of our policymakers in this state. And frankly, it's time to get mad as hell and not take it anymore. Thank you.
Next from Chicago, former Governor Pat Quinn offers his own legislative redistricting plan that he says will pass the muster of the state constitution. This runs about 25 minutes.
And I want to thank everyone for coming. And my name is Pat Quinn, and I'm somebody who's been passing petitions in Illinois for the past 40 years. I believe that voters in our state should have a chance to vote not only for candidates, which is very, very important, obviously, here in the presidential year, but also have a chance to vote on issues. And that's what petition and referendum is all about. And in my time since I left as governor, I got to read part of a biography of a governor of Illinois back, it was in 1913. His name was Edward Dunn. And he, like myself, believed in the power of petition and referendum, and he tried to get in our state what's called initiative and referendum. And it failed by one vote. Actually, they had the vote, and the person changed their vote before it was officially certified in 1913. So I always, when I learned of this, it was with deep regret that we did not have for the past 100 years the power that many other states, particularly here in the Midwest, states like Missouri and Michigan, Ohio, neighboring states have a power at the state level and at the local level where citizens can petition and put issues on the ballot and then enact them into law if they feel that they're worthy. However, as you may know, in 1970, the delegates to the Illinois Constitutional Convention did consider a full-fledged initiative that did not pass the convention, but then several of the delegates felt that there at least ought to be something in the Constitution, the new Constitution, that would allow the voters to put on the ballot referendums that would reform legislative processes, the legislature itself. And this was enacted by the convention. It was approved by the voters in 1970. On December 16th of 1970, and it became the Constitution of Illinois, and it marked the first time in the history of our state that voters at the statewide level could actually petition for binding referendums where they would enact the constitutional amendment. We tried that in 1976 for the first time. It was a case of first impression before the Illinois Supreme Court, and the court held that ethics could not be enacted by initiative. It was a very difficult decision to accept. We had gathered 635,158 signatures, all-time high in Illinois for 3 measures, constitutional amendments that would have ended advance pay for legislators, stopped double dipping, and prevented legislators from voting on bills where they had a conflict of interest. The court back then said you could not initiate, the people couldn't, ethics measures. It was disappointing. This time of year, I always think of that. It was 40 years ago, just about today. But we kept going. We had a great group of people who passed petitions and believed in the power of referendum, and we kept on petition passing on important issues. And in 1980, we were able to gather nearly 500,000 signatures for what was called the Cutback Amendment. It's a constitutional amendment that reduced the size of the Illinois House from 177 members to 118, and it also required each of those members to be elected from a single-member district. That was a highly contested battle. The General Assembly, in the middle of our petition drive, radically changed petition-passing law in Illinois, made it very difficult to even circulate a petition. I think one person said if the person you're trying to get to sign your petition wasn't of the same blood type as the circulator, they couldn't get the signature. But we thought it was way overboard, unconstitutional. We fought all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court. And about this time in 1980, 36 years ago, the Illinois Supreme Court struck down that anti-petition passing law and put the Cutback Amendment on the ballot. And the people voted for it in November of 1980 by a huge margin, more than 2 to 1. I think it was about 68%. And that marks the only time in state history since 1818 that voters have put a binding referendum on the statewide ballot and enacted that by their votes in a referendum. Nothing has happened since, and nothing happened before. And I think it's very unfortunate. I know exactly how the people who were promoting the independent maps referendum feel. When you put all that effort in to get 500,000 or more names on a petition, and then it doesn't get on the ballot for the voters to have their chance to vote for it, it's a severe disappointment. But I think it is important to kind of take a lesson from our experience and my experience that you never give up. And I think it is important to have redistricting reform in Illinois, to have voters have a chance to vote on this issue. Because we know from, I guess, 2 years ago and now this year, there have been 2 tries that have fallen short. And I think basically the court, in its decision and opinion last week, made it pretty clear that you have to comply with every part of the Illinois Constitution if you're going to get a redistricting referendum on the ballot for the voters to vote on. Now, this was the measure that was declared unconstitutional last week. In my view, and I mentioned this to some of the people I met along the way, the drafters and such, that it's very complicated, very long, and it is now unconstitutional. So I don't think this is the method to go for in trying to get a referendum on the ballot that is binding in Illinois that would reform redistricting. And I think that is a worthy task. So today I've drafted up a fair redistricting amendment that can be petitioned for when the time comes. Right now you cannot, under Illinois' Constitution, circulate petitions for any constitutional amendment. You have to wait until 2 years before the next election. But this fair redistricting amendment is quite a bit, I would say, simpler, cleaner, and pristine. And I think it is important to have something that's lean and clean and pristine if you're going to amend the Illinois Constitution when it comes to redistricting. So under this proposal that I've drafted, and I have reached out to some of the advocates of the independent maps. I talked to one yesterday in particular, and I said, don't give up. This is a subject worth voting on. People want to vote on it by they're signatures this year. They made that, I think, crystal clear. But we have to do it the way the court has outlined. You cannot change a constitution unless you do it according to the rules of the Constitution. So to look at the proposal that I've drafted, it basically eliminates any role whatsoever for the General Assembly to have votes with respect to redistricting. What it does is it says on February 10th of the year following the census, so it would be February 10th of 2021, the next census is in 2020, but on February 10th, the Illinois Supreme Court, as a court, would name 11 people to a fair map redistricting commission, a fair redistricting commission. 11 people, no more than 6 can be of the same political party. The court itself would do this, not just the Chief Justice or some other justice. It would be all of the members of the Supreme Court would have to propose 11 names for this commission. And that would be certified to the Secretary of State. And those men and women would have for 6 months until August 10th the opportunity to have hearings and then to draw a map of the legislative districts, Senate and House, in the state of Illinois. And when they file that map on August 10th, that would be presumed valid. It would not go to the legislature. It would be automatically filed with the Secretary of State, presumed valid, and have force and effect for the elections under the new redistricting map. This is a very simple, straightforward process. Doesn't add people like the Auditor General or others that tripped up the last constitutional amendment. The whole idea is to have a group of men and women, good and true, much like a jury, pick the districts or draw the districts in Illinois. Under the proposal in this constitutional amendment that I have outlined here, you would need 7 of the 11, so that's more than 60%, to approve the map. So they would have 6 months to come up with this process. The Attorney General's role is still preserved if there are any issues that come up. Same way with the Supreme Court. It would have exclusive jurisdiction of any challenges to the map drawn by the Fair Redistricting Commission. But in doing this, I think if you read the Supreme Court case, as I did last week and recently as well, the majority, I think, made it pretty clear that redistricting itself is not off limits for people to petition a question onto the ballot. But the particular question that was attempted last week had some constitutional defects, so the court ruled it off the ballot. So I do believe that there is an opportunity to do this. The constitutional debates made it pretty clear that redistricting reform was a valid subject if done properly, and I think it is worth taking this cause up when time comes to pass petitions again, that we should all gather together in Illinois, do it along the way that I've outlined, I think is the proper way and the cleanest way, the simplest way, and the best way to get reform that Illinois citizens, I think, want in great numbers. So that's what I'm proposing today. I plan to talk to some of the other sponsors and petition passers with the Independent Maps Group to encourage them to kind of follow this outline. I think if they do, they will have the same result we had in 1980. After a long, hard battle, we were able to win passage of a constitutional amendment that was petitioned for by the people and voted on by the people in the best traditions of Illinois democracy. So if you have any questions, glad to answer.
Yeah, my name is James Pratt. Why would letting the Supreme Court appoint the commission make it less political than the current system?
Well, under the current system, if there is a deadlock of a commission, right now it's an 8-person commission, 4 appointed by the Democrats, 4 appointed by the Republicans. If they have a deadlock, then the Supreme Court today nominates 2 people, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, and their names are put in a hat, Abraham Lincoln's stovepipe hat. And this has happened now 3 times, in 1981, 1991, and 2001, where they reach into the hat and pull out the name of the tiebreaker, either a Democrat or Republican. A Democrat was picked in 1981, and a Republican was picked in 1991, and a Democrat was picked in 2001. I think the constitutional drafters never thought in a million years this would ever happen. They thought the very fact you'd have this tiebreaker system would encourage compromise. It clearly hasn't worked. And so I think it is time, after having a constitution now for 46 years, and if it isn't working when it comes to drawing the maps, that we should give the Supreme Court, which already has nominating power for the tiebreaker, to just give them the nominating power for a commission of 11 people, the same number as independent maps proposed on a commission, and say that 7 people have to agree on a map for it to become effective. And that is, again, what the independent maps people are calling for. The key is to have the Supreme Court judges, all 7 of them, come together and nominate these 11 people. They've done this in other kind of occasions in the past, and even court cases. And keep in mind, the Supreme Court judges are elected in the first place, and they must serve, after 10 years, they must be retained by the voters in an election. And so there is some political accountability there for the judges themselves. They are not there for life unless they're retained by the voters after 10 years. So I think this is an accountable system. It's very simple, and it is the best way to break the gridlock.
Did you base this on any other state, as they've tried to also come up with something?
Well, I've looked at other states. We have to keep in mind that the Illinois Constitution is unique in giving voters the initiative and referendum power only for the legislative article of the Constitution. And the way the courts have interpreted this over 40 years, they've kind of narrowed where you can go, even with that power of initiative and referendum on the legislative article. And so the judges, I think, the other day, the majority said, this redistricting remap proposal, it goes beyond the parameters of the legislative article of the Constitution, and that's why they struck it down. But the judge who wrote the opinion, Justice, he made it pretty clear that there are other methods of doing this. Other states have different systems, but in order to comply with our Constitution, I think you have to kind of take the 4 corners of what's in the Constitution today on redistricting. If you look at the Constitution, it's, has a system. And what I've done with this amendment is basically take out a lot of words without adding a lot of verbiage, which the independent maps, that's a lot of verbiage. And I think that tripped them up by removing words and giving the Supreme Court the duty of naming the commission, and then saying that all the other powers of the officers of the state of Illinois, like the Attorney General, are preserved. I think that is a better way to go than what we had before.
How awkward is it for you to be agreeing about something with Bruce Rauner?
Well, he doesn't. I hope he agrees with this. I think anyone who's truly concerned about remapping reform, district reform, should go along with the proposal that I've outlined. It's called the Fair Redistricting Amendment. I have experience in getting this done, and I haven't seen that happen in his case. He can talk about things, but you got to have outcomes. So the goal is to have a good outcome. And I really feel that in order to do this right in Illinois, we have to comply with the Constitution, adhere to the Supreme Court opinions, activate the voters to get signatures on petitions for the next time at this. The number of signatures would be about the same, 300,000 you need minimum. And it should be a bipartisan, nonpartisan effort. And there's lots of people who can do that and want to do that in Illinois. And I think they should have hope and not be hopeless.
Why didn't you propose this earlier, like when the current map was being drawn and you were in office?
Well, the whole idea of the Constitution was to try and get legislators to agree on a map without having the tie-breaking provision employed. And in 2011, that did not there wasn't a tie-breaking commission. The legislature did pass a map. I looked at it very carefully, both at the state and federal level, and I studied it. And I decided that it was complying with the Constitution. The districts were substantially equal in population, they were contiguous, and they were compact. And courts, after I acted, upheld the maps as well. So that is how it happened before, but I think we have to look at the history of Illinois redistricting. As I mentioned, 1981, 91, 2001. So 3 out of 4 times you've had this tiebreaker. And I think also you look at where people are. If the voters go out and get 500,000 or more names on a petition, that's worth looking at. And we should have, in my opinion, much broader initiative and referendum rights for people in Illinois to vote on issues at the state and at the local level. I'm passing a petition right now for a binding referendum here in Chicago, where I live, on term limits for the mayor and electing a consumer advocate. That's provided for in this Constitution. And we need to broaden this power. Too often I think the powers that be have resisted giving voters the chance to vote on issues as well as candidates. So that's a lifelong cause for me. And the way you exemplify it is go out and pass petitions and show how it's done.
Okay. This last attempt on independent maps was purposely, there's this idea that they may have purposely written it so that it would fail, just to keep the issue alive because it's popular. And I'm wondering if that's, do you agree with that assessment?
I don't think so. I think the people I encountered who were circulating the petition or signing it, they in good faith believe in the cause. I did run into one of the lawyers for the group, and I asked her, why did you put the Auditor General in there? That was just sort of asking for trouble. And she said, it was a group effort when it came to drafting the amendment, and that sometimes happens. But I just think this, we know, is unconstitutional, and people work so hard to try and get it on the ballot. Okay, we got the word from the Supreme Court. What we want to do now is learn from that and come up with something that's simple, clean, and pristine. That's what this is. Leaner and cleaner, okay? You got the message there? Okay. If you do it that way, you have a better chance of getting on the ballot.
Sorry. Governor, are you prepared for complaints that your system might disenfranchise minority voters?
Well, when I was governor, I signed bills into law with respect to the law of Illinois on redistricting. And a commission would have to adhere to those standards as well as anyone else. And some of the law provisions that I signed were designed to protect everyone's right to get candidates of their choice and to have redistricting. The law was called the Chinatown Law when I signed it, but for years and years, Chinatown was divided into 4 parts in districts, 4 different districts. And we tried to, by law, remedy that, and I signed that into law. And this year, a person of Chinese American was nominated in the primary. And so I felt that that helped make the process fair. But I do think you always have to have courts at the state and federal level available if anybody, including a commission, draws a district that is biased against any racial group, racial minority. You can go to court. And matter of fact, under the Illinois Constitution, there's still, under our proposal, the right, you can go directly to the Supreme Court and make a claim against the redistricting map. The court would still have exclusive jurisdiction and could act promptly. The way this would work is if August 10th people know what the districts are, then they can start passing petitions to get on the ballot.
So independent maps just sent out a thing saying we're going to request a rehearing in the Supreme Court. So how can you kind of push your plan ahead and not have it be another competing?
Well, I've been there on that one too. We didn't win in 1976, and we petitioned for rehearing. The court didn't grant it. It's very rare. It could happen, but you're on the 1-yard line and you're trying to drop back in the end zone and throw a 100-yard touchdown pass with rehearing. So, it's always worth a try. If you're a lawyer, you try everything on behalf of your client, but you don't want to depend on that. I think, as I told a friend yesterday who was very involved in this, it's better to sort of study what the court said, see what the rules are, and then draft something that fits in those rules. And I think that's really what's going to happen. It's better to happen that way.
The independent maps folks don't adopt your language. Would you go out and circulate petitions with your language?
Well, I don't want to presume anything, and I think it's better for folks who I know what it's like to lose a case in the Supreme Court when it comes to putting a referendum on the ballot. I know exactly how they feel. It's very hard, and it takes a little while to kind of bind up the wounds. But ultimately, I think it's worthy, our idea is worthy of careful study, and I'd be happy to work with any group that would be petitioning for something that's substantially the same as this. I think it's needed in Illinois because we've had this history of going to the edge of the cliff over and over again, and I don't think that's healthy,
Here?
Yeah, first step, we'll just get the spelling of your name so we...
Deborah.
And from what, whereabouts in Oklahoma?
Muldrow, Muldrow.
Deborah, thank you for joining us. We just wanted to take a moment of your time to see what issues are most important to you going into the fall elections.
I think the safety of our country, protection from terrorism, closing the borders to Mexico, those are my main issues.
If you could discuss some of these things with candidates, what would you want to know from them?
Well, I think I already know that Trump is going to build a wall, and I think that's what we have to do first because it doesn't do a lot of good to take them across and then they can walk right back over. So we need to do that first, I think, before we start trying to take them back where they belong.
Any more?
Yeah, unless there's something else you want to talk about.
No.
Level here?
Let's see if we can... This part won't be on the air, but just so we get the spelling of your names right.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we have to admit to what we're going to say.
His first name is signed.
Andy, the last name is Yurko, Y-U-R-C-H-O.
And your name?
Barbara Montz, M-O-N-T-Z.
And where are you from?
From Southern California, so from Fountain Valley, California.
Heading into this fall's election season, what are some of the issues that are most important to you?
Economics is very important, national security, and also having an honest government, of which only one candidate can provide that. And that happens to be Donald Trump.
Are there particular issues that are important to you as well, sir?
Yes, to me it's a one-issue election, and that's the U.S. Supreme Court. And again, we're Trump supporters, and he has named his selections or his candidates in any case, whereas his opponent hasn't.
Do you agree with the standstill in the nomination process for the current Supreme Court vacancy?
Yes. It's regardless of who wins the election, process will probably be the same, confirmation and like. Yeah.
Are there any other issues that stand out in your mind as something that is foremost important to you?
Well, immigration policy is very important since we have not paid any attention to the policy that we currently have. So we need immigration reform. We also need to make sure that those who do come to the country illegally, we need a process for those who need to go home, and for those who want to stay, to give them a process to stay. So all of that is very important, and to date we have done nothing about this in many, many, many years.
Do you feel as though this issue is more important to you being from the Southern California region?
Yes, since we have a lot of illegal immigrants in Southern California, Northern California, and I mean, we just recently issued driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. A large portion of crime is unfortunately, let's say a large percentage, not 50%, but certainly a large portion. And then we have cities such as San Francisco who feel that these criminals should just roam free rather than deporting them. Hence, things happen.
Do you feel as though this is something that can be handled on a state level, or does it need to come from the federal government?
I think we need a federal immigration policy, but I also think the states really need to have the opportunity to handle it themselves.
Is there anything else either one of you would like to add?
No, I'm a strong advocate for Homeland Security, and I believe people coming into the country must be screened, and somebody must keep America safe.
I have one thing to add, and that is, people ask me, or somebody said to me once, I thought you were smarter than that when I said I was a Trump supporter. But what I don't understand of Hillary's supporters is how can you see how someone has broken the law many times, even though they fail to prosecute, but we understand that's political. But if you look at the history, why would you want to trust them with your presidency and your security? It just boggles my mind.
Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Next, from Naperville, Governor Rauner gives an address on his reform agenda, job creation, and the need for term limits. This runs about 20 minutes.
Thank you for allowing me to join you today. Thank you for being business builders in the great state of Illinois. I know what I know is easy, and I know a lot of your clients don't find it always easy, but we're going to change that. We're going to make it better for you. I'm all in for you. Your success is Illinois' success, and together we're going to make Illinois strong and proud again. We're going to get this done. We're at a key turning point in Illinois' history. We've been going down a long, slow road of decline for decades. I've looked back 30 years. I can't find a balanced budget going back 30 years. People are complaining, oh, we got to balance our budget. We've never had a balanced budget. We either borrow from the bond market, we don't pay our bills, or we don't pay into our pensions. That ain't balancing a budget. That's misleading the people of Illinois. And we've been gradually losing our jobs. Employers have lost confidence in the state. Our regulations and our taxes are too high. We've got hostile bureaucracy and red tape, and we're pushing our employees out of the state. We got fewer jobs today in Illinois than we had 17 years ago. We got the highest unfunded pension in America. We got some of the biggest debt, the biggest deficits. And now we got the highest property taxes in America. And rampant cronyism, corruption, and patronage. And I've been in government now for about 18 months. I've never been in government before in my life. It's an interesting experience. You know, I've been a business builder, and I knew government had challenges. But however bad you think government is, it's worse. I mean, it's unbelievable. The self-dealing, the bureaucracy, the mindset of what's in it for me, rather than, it's amazing. Now we're changing the culture. I'm very honored. We've assembled the greatest team. I'm so proud of our team. We've put in outstanding directors in front of, in head of our departments. Best team I think ever assembled to run a state government anywhere. We brought the COO from Georgia, the former governor of Hawaii, the head of corrections from Iowa, the head of the legal department for Mitch Daniels from Indiana. We've the head of Children and Family Services from Florida. We brought stars from other states, as well as business leaders from around Illinois to help come in and run the government. Most of the people who come from other states within the first two weeks of coming to me, working in the government here, they come to me and say, Bruce, wow, this is not how government's supposed to be. That's not how we do it back in my state. And I said, I know, that's why you're here. We're trying to change that and get this government who actually is designed to serve people and serve taxpayers, not serve special interests in the government, or serve a political purpose. What I've been stunned by, I knew it was there, but I had no idea how much our government is designed for political purposes for whoever's in elected office. It's not designed to serve taxpayers or recipients of services. It's designed to advance the ends of whoever's in elected office. That's got to change. So we need 4 types of change. 4 types of change. We need political reform, we need economic reform, we need government reform, and we need education reform. That's a lot. That's a lot. But we're going to get it done. With your help, we'll get it done. In every state that's transformed itself and made itself stronger and better and more prosperous, the business community has gotten involved and made your voices heard. You have got a voice. You have a voice. If you exercise your voice, we can get these changes. And at election time in particular, we got election coming up. Get your voice heard. Spread the word. We need to get folks who are reformers into office. We got a big choice. Are we going to reform our system and go in a positive direction? Or are we going to vote for the status quo? More gradual, slow decline. It drives me nuts. I'm one of the most competitive sons of a gun on the planet. And Illinois, we should be kicking tails. We should be one of the fastest growing states in America. We got the hardest working people in America. We got the best location of any state in America. We got the best agriculture in America. And I come from a dairy farm family and a corn farm family. We've got agriculture. We've got transportation infrastructure. Incredible city in the city of Chicago. We should be kicking tails. Instead, we're one of the lowest performing economic states in America, consistently year over year over year. And that contributes and helps create the crime problem that we're dealing with in Chicago and other communities. That deals with the demand for social services and human services because we got so many vulnerable families that don't have opportunity. And it exacerbates a problem. This is what got me into politics in the first place. We are the worst state in America for funding public education. Come on. Our children and our teachers should be their number one priority with our tax dollars. And we're the worst state in America for state support for K-12 schools. And we have the biggest gap between how we fund our low-income schools versus how we fund our higher-income neighborhood schools. This is un-American. This denies the American dream to low-income families. We have a broken education system. That's what got me into this in the first place. I've been a big public education advocate for 25 years, and my wife has dedicated her life. She left the business world where we met, and she's devoted to early childhood education for low-income kids. So when they're 2, 3, 4, 5, they're getting an education component in their child care, so when they get to first grade, they're ready to thrive. And these kids from very disadvantaged backgrounds thrive when they go through the kind of child care that focus that my wife is dedicated to. She's now in 27 states with her not-for-profit. But we need the 4 types of reforms. Let me just touch. First, on political reform, it's the most important thing we can do because our government's not working for you. It's just not. You know that two-thirds of the elections, the campaigns going on right now for the General Assembly, there's no opponent in the general election. Hello? I mean, democracy doesn't work if there's no choices, if there's no competition of ideas and alternatives. We got gerrymandered districts that look like spaghetti noodles designed to keep in who's ever there and to keep out anybody else. This is wrong. We need redistricting reform. Even President Obama came to Springfield last winter and said, Illinois needs redistricting reform, America needs redistricting reform, so these not partisan gerrymandered districts. He's correct. We need redistricting reform. And the courts threw it out said they couldn't put it on the ballot. And I had no idea how much our judiciary is part of our political process in Illinois. They're elected, they're conflicted, they're in the pensions, they're in the healthcare system. They get worried about who's going to, knock them out of office when they're up for re-election. So they're in the system. So I thought naively we could get the voter referendum, get it on the ballot, so I just said no. I thought 2 years ago when I ran, I've always believed in term limits. I don't think anybody should stay in office more than 8 years. That's my personal belief. And you know, when George Washington was our founding president, he could have been president for life, like what happened in virtually every other country. Hey, yeah, thanks for electing me. I don't need that election stuff anymore. I'll just be here. Well, George Washington said no. He controlled the army. He could have done anything he wanted. He said, no, I'll be a public servant. I'll work for 8 years, and then he said, that's enough. Then he left voluntarily. He said, let other leaders do this. This should be a volunteer thing, and then somebody else should come and let other leaders emerge, other ideas become part of the process. That set a tone that we need in America. I think we should have term limits, and we got 600,000 signatures 2 years ago. Court said, no, can't go on the ballot. And they just said, for redistricting reform, no, can't go on the ballot. And what they've said is, well, it can go on the ballot if the General Assembly puts it on the ballot. Hello. So, I'm traveling the state. We got to hold these individuals accountable. Put it on the ballot. Let the people's voice. You should be able to decide. Vote it up or down. You want redistricting? If you don't, fine. Vote it down. But you should have the voice. You should decide. And I can tell you this. One of the reasons everybody's scared of it is 80% of Democrats, 80% of Republicans want term limits and redistricting reform. The people want it. This is a people's initiative. This is not any political group or any party. People want this. And boy, do we need it. Now being in government, I can see how much we need it. So this is the time. Everybody in this election, you can say, when somebody's asking for your vote, or you're talking to a candidate, you're talking for a General Assembly member, are you going to sign a pledge? Or are you going to commit? Will you put term limits and fair maps on the ballot so we can have a vote on it, or not? Yes or no? Don't go, well, maybe, I don't know. Yes or no? If you say no, you're not a reformer. You're part of the problem. Let's hold some of these folks accountable. We can begin to create some pressure. So, political reform. Second thing, we need economic reform. We've got red tape and regulations that are hassling our businesses. You guys suffer from it. I was honored to sign 2 bills that were good for you guys and good for, we got rid of some of the excess fees on impounded cars. We could block some of the excessive fees that fire departments charge. I'm trying to reduce the regulatory burden and the way that government costs go up as much as I can. Boy, it's tough, and we have a supermajority against us. But I'm trying to cut here, limit there, and try to do everything I can. We got to get the cost of government down and the bureaucracy off the backs of businesses. Have to do it. So the biggest thing I'm trying to change is workers' comp costs in Illinois. Workers' comp is driving our manufacturing base out of the state. We have some of the highest workers' comp costs in America. It's the #1 regulatory problem pushing our businesses out of state. We also have other labor regulations that are too tough. We've got our tort system, our liability costs, our liability insurance is too high. We got to get tort reform, and we're pushing that very aggressively. Illinois should be so much stronger than Texas, so much stronger than Tennessee on economic growth. And you know the #1 state where our jobs are going? You guys know? Indiana. Come on. They ain't going there for the weather. I mean, come on. We should be kicking it, you're kidding me. And it's because the regulations there and the property taxes there are so much more reasonable. They're so much more pro-growth. And I've talked to a number of companies. They've just slid 20 miles across the border from the western burbs, south burbs of Chicago, and the south side of Chicago, where we need more jobs. They just slide over to northwest Indiana. Workers' comp and property taxes. We've got to change the regulatory burden on business. Third priority, government. Government itself has to change. We've got 7,000 units of government in Illinois. Did you guys know this? Way more than any other state in America. I'm sure you're stunned by that. 7,000. The #2 state behind us has 2,000 units of government fewer than us. Come on. And these government entities, they have taxing authority, many of them, not all. They have pensions, they have patronage, they have cronyism. There's somebody's, political little fiefdom. And it's ridiculous. So we've got to streamline and get government consolidation. We've got to get rid of these unfunded mandates. Springfield sends all these mandates down on local governments. You have to do this, you have to do that, you can't do this, you can't. And they don't pay, Springfield doesn't pay for it. It puts huge burden on our local governments, huge burden. So we've laid out a plan. We've got reforms around unfunded mandates and government consolidation. We also have to reform our pension system. And just last week, the Teachers Retirement Board said, well, we're not getting enough return in the pensions, so we're changing our assumptions, and that means in the state budget, you're going to have to spend more than $450 million next year to put more money in the teachers' pension. So there you go. We've already got an unbalanced budget, and now they just added $450 million more annually that we got to put into the pensions. Not sustainable. The pension system is broken. Now, we have to honor historical commitments. We don't take away or reduce somebody's benefit they've accrued and paid it so far, even though it was not fair when we started. But the prior politicians made these deals. We got to, the deal's a deal. But going forward for new hires, going forward for new work, future work, we can have different deals. We need good retirement, but taxpayers don't have the kind of retirement that these in the public sector. Oh my goodness. And a lot of these folks have 2 pensions, 3 pensions, guaranteed 3% compound COLA, whether there's inflation or not. You get salary for life with 3% escalators. Retire in your 50s. I mean, come on. It's not sustainable. It's not fair. So we got to change the government, and we're pushing. We got a plan. It's all laid out. We got it in bill form. And then the final thing is education. Now, I'm very personally passionate about education. We need to reform our education system. It's not properly funded. It's inequitably funded. And there's no real accountability. And the good news is our ISAT is gone, our Illinois Standardized Test. That was a travesty. That was the dumbest, lowest state standardized test in America, rigged by the bureaucrats and the teachers union. And they dummied it down 3 times over the years to make it look like our schools were doing better when they weren't. The cut scores got manipulated down. It was a rigged system. We should have the best schools in America. There's no reason that we can't have the best schools in America in every neighborhood, regardless of income of the neighborhood. We can do this. We can do this. Chance at the American dream. We need high quality education, K to 12, and we've got to make sure that we don't just say, well, everybody's got to go to a 4-year college. Not everybody's can or should go to a 4-year college, but everybody deserves a good career. And I'm not a big fan of the European economic model, but one thing that Germany and other countries do way better than us, they have a high quality dual track. You can choose the professional college career track to go be a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, or whatever, or you can be highly trained and highly skilled as a maintenance technician, as a welder, as a service, and we don't do this in Illinois the way we should. We should have high quality programs in high school, starting freshman year in high school, to train people for the jobs that are available. We have a shortage of welders. We have a shortage of maintenance technicians. We have a shortage, and these are jobs, these aren't minimum wage jobs. People can make 45, 50, 60, 70 grand. And someone can do it right out of when they're 18, 19 years old, coming right out of school. And if they saw that as a path for themselves, maybe they wouldn't be so subject to the recruiting of the gangbangers. I mean, we can do this. People's got to see a future and have the education to see where they can take advantage of this future. We've got to change our education system and make it our priority for our tax dollars. Get the money out of the government bureaucracy, the wasteful stuff, and put it into our schools with our teachers in the classroom, and have excellent schools throughout the state. We can do this. We can do this. Now, we're coming to a key point. We've been battling. I'm living dog years. It's only been 18 months I've been there, but I feel like I've been there for 20 years. My joke is, when I started this job, I was 6'6" and had a full head of hair. I mean, I got I'm like, oh man, this is tough. But we're changing the system. We've already cut $800 million out of operating costs of the government. And we've gotten new deals with 18 of the government unions. We're the most unionized government in America. Many of our departments, 99%, 97% union. The management's in the union. And they set up the work rules and the overtime to go into the pension so to maximize. Whoa. And I won't go through, and the layers of bumping. You can't fire anybody, you know, unless they committed murder and they got blood on their hands and they have 12 witnesses, and even then you'll be sued, and even then you'll probably lose. I mean, you can't, and if you do fire somebody or you have a slot, there's 6 layers of bumping. You got to move up 6 people and go down to the bottom before you can get anybody up. It's an unbelievable system. I have to get 6 permissions just to turn on a light switch. It's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. But we put in new contracts that are totally more flexible with 18 of the unions. And I said, the union said to us, well, we want $3 billion more in pay over the next 4 years. And I said, we can't afford it. Not going to do it. I said, no salary increases for the next 4 years because we can't afford salary increases right now. We have the highest paid state employees in America, as a sidelight. And I said, but I'll pay you bonuses. I want you to make more. But I'll give you a percentage of every tax dollar that you save. You save taxpayers $1 in your department, I'll give you 10 cents of that dollar. Give you guys bonuses every way going forward. And a lot of the state employees go, yeah, I know how to save money. And they do know how to save money. There's a lot of money to be saved. The union bosses, nope, we don't do that. Seniority only. No. So we're having a little bit of a, little disagreement. We'll work it out. We're at an impasse, but we'll get it done. But 18 of the unions have agreed, and that's a culture change. Incentive pay, merit pay, not just seniority pay. It's a big deal, big culture shift inside the government. And we're privatizing, not privatizing in the sense of just shutting it down in government, but we're forming partnerships with private sector. We're forming a partnership with businesses to streamline and modernize our Department of Commerce, do what other states have done so we can recruit more businesses effectively. We are forming a private foundation that is completely owned by the business community and philanthropists in agriculture so we can fix up our fairgrounds so taxpayers don't have to pay. We're completely raising private money to fix up the governor's residence where my wife and I live now. So we don't want to put the burden on the taxpayers. We're going to fix up our fairgrounds. We're going to fix up the governor's residence. We're going to fix the Department of Commerce so we're more effective in recruiting businesses. And we're forming public-private partnerships to expand our highway network. We can have private money completely expand our lanes and do flexible tolling so the investors can get money, but it's incremental growth, and taxpayers don't have to fund the money to build the new lanes on I-55 and other parts of the state. So the big transformation's underway. It's very exciting. It's hard, but we're getting there. And your support is critical. That's why I was so excited to come and say thank you for building business. The number one thing we got to do is help you guys and help the business community grow. The whole key to solving our problems is economic growth. Everything else is contingent on that. We won't solve any of the other problems if we don't have strong economic growth. So helping you guys grow is what it's all about. This is a big election. Vote. Tell your friends to vote and ask the question, whether you're Democrat or Republican. I'm a free market Republican. My wife's a Democrat. Nobody's perfect. I love her anyway. This is not about Democrat or Republican. This is about reform or the status quo. We've got to get reformers into office. People who say, we're going to do the right thing for the people of Illinois, change the trajectory, grow again, become prosperous. We can have a great future, proud, prosperous here in the great state of Illinois. This is our home. Home's worth fighting for. We're fighting for the future of our home here. God bless you all. Have a great conference. We'll look forward to seeing you again. Thanks very much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members.
Hello, I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. Most people never look at a school and think of it being an economic enterprise that spends tens of millions of dollars every year. They look at the school as a place their children attend for education, or perhaps as a place to attend a local sporting event. But handling the business of education is the job of the school business officials. We're the ones that keep track of the millions of dollars that come in and go out. Our members face a myriad of issues that include financing new buildings, paying teachers and staff, tracking our pension costs, and supervising the many businesses that contract with local schools. And that's why I'm so happy to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel connects us with legislators working on educational issues in the state capitol, as well as covering educational issues being discussed at conferences around the state. As we see in the debate over pensions, the many details involved in just that one issue, we need a news organization that's willing to give enough time to cover an important issue in depth. I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter most.
Next from Springfield, we sit down for a one-on-one interview with former New Mexico Governor and current Libertarian presidential candidate Gary Johnson as he discusses his economic policy, why a wall on America's southern border won't work, the war on drugs, and his completed expeditions to climb the highest mountains on each of the 7 continents. This runs about 40 minutes.
Former Governor Gary Johnson of New Mexico, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Terry, great to be with you, and great to be in Illinois, where I'm going to be participating in the Libertarian presidential debates here. State convention. For me, it'll be about one of 12 debates, prelude to the Libertarian National Convention in Orlando, Florida over Memorial Day, at which time the Libertarian Party will pick a presidential candidate.
People may not know your background, so let's just do a quick background. You were the governor, two-term governor of New Mexico, and at that time you were elected as a Republican, and I believe that was the first time you'd ever held office.
That's right. I was really deciding what party to run for, and well, from a fiscal conservancy standpoint, the fact that I am a kind of a penny pincher and that tax dollars are really important, I thought I probably lined up most with Republicans. New Mexico is a state that's 2-to-1 Democrat, so having gotten elected as a Republican and gotten re-elected being a penny pincher, I thought that spoke volumes. I think everybody just saw a consistency and a fairness to my fiscal conservancy. Terry, I may have vetoed more bills as governor of New Mexico than the other 49 governors in the country combined. I vetoed 750 bills outright, and I had thousands of line-item vetoes. I took line-item veto to a new art form.
In fact, I believe your nickname was Governor Veto.
It was, and in a good way. I think, like I say, I think everybody saw the equity in it, and everybody saw the fact that, gee, state government really ran well, and because it was being run for less money and fewer employees, it just spoke to efficiency. It just spoke to good government.
Why were you vetoing this? And let's get into your fiscal policy beliefs. We'll cover some others, but let's start there. Were you vetoing these items because they were spending too much money and you were trying to get government spending under control?
For the most part, it was spending. It was spending $250,000 for dropout prevention in New Mexico. Well, gee, first of all, that's what the educational system is supposed to be dealing with, and was the $250,000 going to make a difference when it came to the dropout rate? I didn't think so. And so I stood up and said, you know what, laudable goal, but this is what the educational system of New Mexico is supposed to provide, and I don't think $250,000 is going to make a difference whatsoever. My favorite piece of legislation that I vetoed, Terry, this was a Republican bill passed the first year I was in office. It was a dog and cat exercise bill. It was going to require pet stores to exercise their dogs and cats 2 hours a day, 3 times a week. Now, I got to tell you, that's where I want to buy my dogs and cats, is in a store that exercises their dogs and cats. I'd like to see it as a sign above the window. But in vetoing the legislation, I said, if I sign this legislation, the next thing I'm going to have to do at some point, there will be dog and cat exercise police. And all my vetoes, the product from the legislature, which was 2-to-1 Democrat, got dramatically reduced. So I wasn't getting nearly the number of bills that my predecessors had gotten in front of them because they realized that I was just going to outright veto them. And I don't think people realize that about half of all legislation that gets passed is fix-up language for prior legislation. And I always looked at every piece of legislation from the standpoint of, is this going to make things better? Is this going to make life better? And if it was, I signed it. But you know what? Is this going to just add time and money to my life and not accomplish anything? Well, there were a lot of those, and I vetoed those.
When you were first elected, your background was a small businessman. You had been I think you started off as a handyman and then grew that into a major construction firm. Is that right?
Yeah, so I started out as a one-man handyman. I've paid for everything I've had in my life since I've been 17. I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, starting with paper routes and shoveling snow and raking leaves. But I started a one-man handyman business in college and actually grew that business to employ over 1,000 people. Became New Mexico's largest construction employer, which really, it's amazing the success that anyone can have if they just show up on time and if they just do what they say they're going to do, which is what I did. Do a little bit more than what you say you'll do for people. Amazing. And then when it comes to employees, share in the profits. That is also a magic formula. Share in the profits and the pie gets much, much bigger.
You learn things along the way of running a business, as anyone would, about managing people and all. How we often hear in our political discussions as a nation, people will run like Donald Trump, and they'll say, we want to run government like a business. And to what extent can you run government like a business, and to what extent is it different?
You can run it completely like a business. Best product, best service, lowest price. Good government was easy. Now let's just for a second talk about Donald Trump. Donald Trump and I made the same pitch. He's making the same pitch to America that I made to New Mexico. Look, business guy, never been involved in politics, best product, best service, lowest price. Just watch how amazing this will work. But I never said anything as ridiculous as deporting 11 million illegal immigrants, building a fence across the border. Terry, I'm speaking here as a border governor. That's crazy.
Let me interject. Why is that? A lot of Republicans, even those who say Donald Trump has gone over the line and don't support Trump, would say, in fact, I think all the Republican candidates.
All of them.
Well, we've already passed legislation to fund the building of a wall, and we've done it partially. What's wrong with building a wall across the?
Well, for number one, if you're going to build the wall 30 foot tall, I think you can still probably come up with a 40-foot ladder to get up one side or the other, or the most.
People say that, but that would certainly. I mean, I think hasn't it, where they've done it over by San Diego, slowed down the number. San
Diego's San Diego's a different story, but you are talking a total of about 2,800 miles of border with Mexico. And the Rio Grande River is the border between Texas and Mexico. So you're going to build a wall in the middle of the Rio Grande, and
I believe you would do it on the land side of it, but
well, which land side? If you're going to do it on
the United States.
Well, then you're going to, because half of the Rio Grande is ours, you're going to leave the Rio Grande on the Mexican side. I mean, I'm just telling you, this is wacko.
The thing is, it would.
The devil is in the details here. Yeah.
You're saying it can't be built?
Number one, it can't be built. And number two, let's just say we're going to build the wall right down the middle of the Rio Grande. So we're going to somehow excavate the middle of the Rio Grande. How's the water adjudication going to work?
The obvious thing would be you would have that part of the Rio Grande outside the wall. You would have the wall on the land side of the United States. We would still have the United States territory be half of the middle Grande, but Rio Grande rather.
Oh, I'm glad you.
Well,
I mean, I've got you thinking about that already. You're thinking, whoa, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
But why, in a larger sense, not to talk about the construction of the wall, why would you say, and again,
Border governor.
But we hear about any number of bad things happening, the drugs coming in.
Well, drugs, that's all. So what we should be doing is making it as easy as possible for somebody that wants to come into the country and work to be able to get a work visa. Not a green card, not citizenship, but a work visa. Work visa should entail a background check and a Social Security card that applicable taxes are getting paid. Make the line moving to come across the border. And if we'll do that, we'll see everybody comply on the Mexico side with getting that work visa. Right now, the line's not moving. You can see the jobs from Juarez, you can see the jobs in El Paso that exist, but you can't get across the border, so now you have to cross illegally to get those jobs. And by the way, we should not put the government in charge of quotas either. Look, the jobs will either exist or they won't exist, and right now there's a reverse migration taking place. There's more jobs in Mexico right now than there are in the United States, so you have this flow going back into Mexico as opposed to the United States, currently.
When you were governor, and let's say, what years were you governor?
95 through 2002.
When you were the governor of New Mexico during that period of time, did your state not suffer some from the illegal immigration?
No. I think that this whole immigration issue is a boogeyman, that we should embrace immigration. We are a country of immigration.
I think the issue is illegal immigration versus immigration.
Well, even illegal. And that's also something that's really misunderstood. 40, 50 years ago, let's call them undocumented workers that came over to the United States before we started calling them illegal, but undocumented workers, well, guess what? They've had families, they've had kids who have had kids who have had kids. They're community leaders in New Mexico, and to this day, they are still not U.S. citizens. I mean, that's just the way it is. And you're talking about thousands of these individuals. Well, we're going to deport these individuals?
What would you do with people who have been here for the majority of their life?
Well, for people that have been here and that don't have any criminal record whatsoever, we should offer a pathway to citizenship, just like this country has always been a beacon of hope, of opportunity. That's what they're seeking. They're not taking jobs away from U.S. citizens. They're taking jobs that U.S. citizens don't want. There's also a misconception about pay. Pay is not an issue unless language is an issue. And if that's the case, Mexicans understand that front and center.
What do you mean by pay is not an issue unless language is an issue?
Well, for example, if you're coming over from Mexico and you can't speak English, you're not going to get pay equal to someone that can speak English, because English is a big part of being able to work. So they're the first ones that recognize that. They're bent on learning the language, and they do. And when that is the case, wage parity is always the case, or even higher wages, because these people have a terrific work ethic.
Let's move along to the fact that you're running. You were a Republican governor. You're now a Libertarian. We've had third-party candidates. Even Theodore Roosevelt was a Republican who then ran as a third-party candidate in 1912. In fact, he was probably the most successful. He came in second in the presidential election of 1912, ahead of the incumbent president at the time. But no third-party candidate has ever even come close to winning the presidency, unless you want to count Theodore Roosevelt back then, over 100 years ago. Why should any of the voters even pay attention to a third-party candidate?
Well, first of all, no voters are going to pay any attention to a third-party candidate unless the third-party candidate is in the presidential debates. And I'm talking about the general election. Right now, I'm suing the Presidential Debate Commission. Actually, Bruce Fein is suing the Presidential Debate Commission. Bruce Fein's claim to fame is that he brought Nixon down in Watergate. He says the presidential debate lawsuit is the biggest thing that he has done in his life. Well, I got to tell you, Terry, that's some pretty significant comparison there. But the contention is that the Presidential Debate Commission is basically a monopoly. So we're suing on the grounds of the Sherman Act, that they are a monopoly, that they are a business, that they collude with one another to exclude everyone else. The Presidential Debate Commission came into existence after Ross Perot appeared in the presidential debates, the last third-party candidate to appear in the presidential debates. Well, the League of Women Voters had been sponsoring the presidential debates, and in a very highly publicized letter to America said, this is a fraud being perpetuated on the American public, and we, the League of Women Voters, we don't want any part of it. Well,
when they say this is a fraud, what was it they were referring to?
The fact that it's Democrats and Republicans that make up the presidential debates, that Clinton and Bush actually signed an agreement to not debate other candidates other than themselves, that the League of Women Voters was being dictated the terms of what was supposed to be really a nonpartisan presentation of American politics.
Let me, so we don't get too mired in something that people will find maybe a little abstract, but the point is if you can't be in the debates as a third-party candidate, you can't get your message out to the totality of the American people.
Exactly. And I think what's important to point out is that the Libertarian nominee, and I'm seeking the Libertarian nomination, but the Libertarian nominee will be on the ballot in all 50 states. That's a claim that no other third party will be able to lay claim to because of deadlines that have already passed.
You ran 4 years ago as a Libertarian candidate, correct?
And got 1% of the vote, got 1.3 million votes. It was kind of disappointing. Not just kind of disappointing, it was. But what I saw front and center is just the inequality in our system. The fact that the Republican candidate for president has to go out and garner the support of 30% of the far right. Democrat candidate has to go out and garner the support of 30% of the far left. 50% of Americans now consider themselves or declare themselves as independent. I think the two major parties at the end of the day end up representing 30% of the American electorate. I think the vast majority of Americans are libertarians. They just don't know it.
We should have gone a little bit maybe more into the issues. If you summarize, what would be your approach on fiscal policy?
Well, I think the biggest issue facing this country right now is that government is too big, it spends too much, it tries to accomplish too much. So I propose balancing the federal budget. I think that there will be a huge negative consequence to the fact that we continue to spend so much money that we don't have, and that we need to balance the federal budget. And balancing the federal budget, you know, that's a combination of cutting spending, growing the economy. From a growing the economy standpoint, let's eliminate corporate tax. Let's eliminate income tax. If we're going to replace it with anything, let's replace it with a federal consumption tax. And if we do that, there's no longer a need for the IRS. Imagine living our lives without the IRS.
And the consumption tax would be that like a sales tax.
A sales tax. And what I put out for everybody to look at is the fair tax. It is a proposal before Congress. It has been for many years. It dots the I's and crosses the T's on how you would accomplish one federal consumption tax.
Now, on the other hand, we fund Social Security and Medicare through the payroll tax. So
right.
If you didn't have an IRS, who's going to be making sure that people are paying those taxes and not underreporting their income?
Well, in the case of a consumption tax and how to do that, what the fair tax does in that case is that all the states would administer the consumption tax, which they already do. So it's not it's a bureaucracy that's minuscule compared to the IRS. And when it comes to Social Security, when it comes to Medicaid, when it comes to unemployment, all of those proceeds, all of that funding would come out of the consumption tax. So no longer any withholding from your paycheck. You'd get paid a flat amount, and like I say, but we would all be subject to paying a consumption tax on all goods and services that we use.
On foreign affairs, what is your approach, and how would it vary from what we've seen at the two parties?
Well, so libertarians, look, government has a fundamental role to provide protection for all of us against individuals, groups, corporations, foreign governments that would do us harm. That is government's responsibility. That's what government exists for. There is a very real Islamic terrorist threat out there. But is it best addressed? Is it at all addressed with boots on the ground, with dropping bombs, with drone strikes that are killing thousands of innocent individuals? No. Let's stop with our military interventions. The military interventions are not responsible for Islamic terrorism, but they're not making things better. So let's contain what's happening over in the Middle East, and then let's cut off the funding to terrorism, which is, let's just follow the lead of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates when it comes to how we cut the funding off to terrorism, and we can do that. Foreign aid, it sounds great. Foreign aid, medicine, food for people in need. Well, the reality is foreign aid really is just propping up one despot over another despot. And so from a foreign aid standpoint, don't we have needs in this country? Shouldn't we be addressing our needs first?
Well, I don't even know if that's 1% of the federal spending, but something like 65% of federal spending is the entitlement and interest on the debt. What would you do to control entitlement spending?
Yeah. So first of all, if you're talking about balancing the budget, which I am, you're talking about a 20%, in today's dollars, a 20% reduction in funding. And the biggies are Medicaid and Medicare.
You mean a reduction in spending? Or?
Reduction in, well, yes. In other words, to balance the federal budget, we would have to cut spending by 20%. Well, the biggies are Medicaid, Medicare, and military spending. Social Security, as I alluded to earlier, that funding would come out of the... Social Security is imminently fixable. I mean, there are some reforms to Social Security. One would be raising the retirement age. Another would be a very reasonable means testing. Should you be able to get more money out of Social Security than what you put in, given the amount of money that you put in, and given the amount of money that you currently make? You could have a very fair means testing.
And by means, sometimes we use these terms and they don't fall easy on the ears. But if somebody retired as a multimillionaire, you might say you either A, don't get anything, or B, you get less than someone who needs the money to live on.
Well, using that example, the multimillionaire that retires shouldn't be able to get more money out than what they put in. They should certainly be able to get the amount of money that they put in, but not beyond that, given a certain level of income. Also, it would be, I think to be able to self-direct retirement funds, at least a portion of it. I think that would be good reform to Social Security. But Medicaid, Medicare, as governor of New Mexico, I firmly believe that if the federal government block granted the states 20% less money, gave Medicare as a health care program for those over 65 to the states to administer, and gave welfare spending, Medicaid, to the states to administer with 20% less money, I absolutely believe that in my heart of hearts I could have delivered health care in the state of New Mexico. If we gave it up to the states to do this, what you would have is you'd have 50 laboratories of best practice where some really significant best practices would emerge that every other state would emulate. And we'd also have horrible failure that states would avoid. But this is how we're going to solve the entitlements when it comes to Medicaid and Medicare. And then military spending. Cutting military spending 20%. Look, we're only going back a few years, literally, just a handful of years to be able to accomplish that kind of a spending reduction, that being how much we increase military spending every year. And keeping in mind that we spend as much on our military as the rest of the countries in the world combined.
Well, the thing is, though, and I mean, just to point out to people, that we spent, I was actually just looking at this, that we spend about 3.3% of our GDP, which is a big GDP, on defense spending. Japan is spending only 1%. But on the other hand, we have been the people that have really been taking care of defense, right? I mean, the Germans,
exactly.
The French, the Japanese,
the great Euro
are not really. They're, forgive me for saying it to my foreign friends, but they're mooching off the American taxpayer.
They're sucking off the American tit when it comes to military spending. Yes, they're able to spend money on social. We're subsidizing their health care.
Yeah, because they're not having to spend that money knowing that they're being covered by the American military.
Doesn't seem to be fair to me.
That's too. That's a long, complicated.
Well, you said it. You stated it very well, though.
But let me move on to one of the areas I think a lot of people here, as I talk to different people over the years, I would base are fiscal conservatives and social moderates. To that end, the Libertarian Party is appealing, although they may or may not think to themselves that a third party just doesn't have a chance. But I think one of the areas where the libertarian approach hits a snag in people's minds is on the drugs. And we see right now there's an epidemic of heroin use, cheap heroin going in New Hampshire. It was a problem. It's a problem here in Illinois. It's a problem across the country. What is your approach to the controlling of drugs, and how would we keep illegal drugs out of the hands of, like, high school children?
Well, I consider this good news. In 1999, I was the highest elected official in the United States to call for the legalization of marijuana. Bad news is Terry, in 2016, I'm still the highest ranking elected official to ever call for the legalization of marijuana, although apparently Bernie Sanders is saying the same thing. I'm glad he hit his head, and welcome aboard, Bernie. But that said, I have always maintained that by legalizing marijuana, that it will lead to less overall substance abuse, because people are going to find it as such a safer alternative than everything else that is out there, starting with alcohol. The campaign to legalize marijuana in Colorado was a campaign based on marijuana is safer than alcohol. So turning to drugs and drug epidemic, I think it's shocking when you find out that when 450,000 people die every year from their use of tobacco, and that's the number they put out there, when 100,000 people a year die from their use of legal prescription drugs, we're talking about painkillers, antidepressants, when 100,000 people a year die from their use of alcohol, and I'm not talking about drinking and driving or violence associated with alcohol, I'm just talking about the physical effects of alcohol. When 100,000 people die every year, let me ask, I'm going to put you on the spot, Terry. How many people die every year from heroin and cocaine overdose? Based on those numbers that I just said.
Yeah, I don't know.
What would you think? 400,000, 100,000, 200,000? What would you think? Just logically speaking.
Well, I mean, to this point, I don't know how updated your numbers are. To this point, heroin had been minuscule use, but now it's becoming more widespread. So,
well, I'm going to tell you just what an epidemic this is. Okay. What would your guess be?
Oh, I would maybe 50,000.
50,000. Thank you. 8,000 a year. So when you start when they start touting about a heroin epidemic and that the overdose is off the charts.
But it doesn't have to be that you're dying from heroin to have it ruin your life.
Well, what ruins your life is the prohibition. Prohibition is 90% of the problem, and that's not to discount the problems with use and abuse.
Would the addiction be what ruins your life?
Well, what ruins your life is quality, quantity is unknown. So when people say, well, gee, there's only 8,000 deaths a year from heroin overdose, well, that's because it's illegal. No. It's because it's illegal that there are 8,000 deaths. If it were legal, if quality, quantity were known, there wouldn't be, people would still kill themselves, but they wouldn't overdose because quality, quantity was unknown.
Would it be clear, what is your policy relative to heroin?
Well, first of all, the only drug I am advocating legalizing is marijuana. But I think we are in the process of legalizing marijuana nationwide, and in that process, I think we're becoming enlightened regarding substance abuse and the fact that it shouldn't be criminalized. It shouldn't be criminalized. A person should be, so would the world be a better place if all drugs were legalized tomorrow? Yes. I'm not advocating such. I'm not advocating that because we don't know how to legalize the harder drugs. But if you take Amsterdam, for example, They have a heroin maintenance program. And if you're a heroin addict, you get free heroin. And the idea was that death, disease, crime, corruption, all of those things would plummet because it would be heroin-controlled environment, paid for by the government. The chief of police from Zurich, Switzerland, came to Albuquerque when I was governor, and he said when they came out with this program in Zurich, he said, I've been in law enforcement my entire life. All my friends were in law enforcement. We could not have been more opposed to this program in Zurich. And I am here to tell you that Zurich is a much better place to live today because all of the things that they said positive might happen have happened. Death, disease, crime, corruption, they've all plummeted, and citizens of Zurich have voted to re-up on this program every single year since.
Before we move off of the issues entirely, as we discussed, you started a business, you sold the business, you didn't have to work anymore, you went in. What drives you? What is the passion? And I don't mean, in other words, you want to accomplish something policy-wise. If you know you can't get everything done, if you could say, I'd be President of the United States and I would be happy if I could get this, that, and the other thing done, what would be your top priorities?
Well, I've been asked, turn the question a little bit, I've been asked, well, what were you most proud of having been governor of New Mexico? I was proud of the fact that we took everything on, that nothing was political, that every single area, whether it was education, whether it was health and human services, law enforcement, laws on the books, there was a conscious effort to improve in every single category. And I'd be the first one to tell you the areas that there was least improvement in. But that would be my same approach as President of the United States. Just a balanced approach to everything that's happening in this country. There would be no sacred cows. There'd be no politics associated with, gee, this is something we shouldn't touch because it's so politically active or radioactive. And look, I point to my advocacy for legalization of marijuana in 1999, which at the time, Terry, 30% of Americans in 1999 supported legalizing marijuana. Mine being the only voice to legalize it amongst elected officials. Today, I'm still the only voice, but 58% of Americans support legalizing marijuana. So, look, public policy, being in a position of political, having been elected politically, being in a position of power, you can drive public opinion and you can change things. And I've seen that happen myself.
Before we started the interview, we were talking off camera that you're here by yourself. You don't have an entourage sitting as so many candidates would if they're from running for president as a Republican or Democrat. On campaign finance, what is your thoughts on that, having now in your second run for the presidency? What should we do as a society? Donald Trump saying he's self-funding because he doesn't want to be bought and paid for as he would allege other candidates are. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, that campaign finance reform should simply entail 100% transparency. That's it. Make it unlimited contribution by any individuals, by any corporations, by any unions, unlimited contribution. Just make it 100% transparent. Right now with these super PACs, they are completely in the dark. They are totally in the dark. There is no public disclosure at all required from the super PACs. And when you limit campaign contributions, what you end up doing really is the opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. When you limit campaign contributions, what you're doing is you're just giving the incumbent, you're giving the establishment the leg up. Because the only way you can break through is to actually have resources to break through. When I ran for governor of New Mexico, how did I raise money? I paid for it all myself. I paid for it all myself in my first primary, and so I didn't have to go out and seek any money whatsoever, and I wasn't bought and paid for. People saw that, so people contributed after I actually became the nominee in New Mexico, but there wasn't a quid pro quo.
Did anyone ever try, whether you were as a candidate or governor, to, we'll give you money for your campaign or re-election if you do this?
Yes, and the response was, you know what, you've got a wrong number here. The other thing that I really enjoyed, and I got a handful of these phone calls, was, I contributed $10,000 to your campaign and you just vetoed my bill. Well, my response was, number one, I didn't know that that was your bill, and your bill is like highway robbery. It's crony capitalism at its peak, and lastly, would you like a refund? And nobody took me up on the refund offer. But that was one of my favorite lines.
We'll close out, but I think the other interesting thing is, as we were talking earlier, who Gary Johnson is, and just as you're a fitness person, and who's actually accomplished some. I would say you're what, 63 years old now.
Yeah.
And just last year, what did you do that I think people would find pretty stunning?
Well, I've had a goal to climb the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, and of course that includes Mount Everest, and that's McKinley. And
when did you climb? You did climb Mount Everest.
Yes, in 2003, but the goal was to climb the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, and just last year was my last of the 7, and that was Antarctica. Next summer, unless I'm elected President of the United States, I'm planning to ride the Divide, which is a mountain bike race across the Continental Divide. It's 3,000 miles, and it starts in Banff, Canada, and it ends on the border of Mexico, New Mexico, following the Continental Divide the whole way, and it's unsupported. So at 64, those are my plans.
I could go on for hours. This would be fascinating. But let me just ask, what was it like, A, to climb Mount Everest, and which of the climbs was the most difficult of the 7 highest peaks on the 7 continents?
The most difficult was Everest, just because it is so high. I mean, 29,000 feet. If we were taken right now to 29,000 feet, we would pass out in a matter of minutes because of the altitude, and we'd actually die in about 15 minutes because of the altitude. But that was the hardest climb, all of what went along with it, and it was a dream come true. Standing on top of the planet, holy cow! Didn't have any real issues at all doing that. And I always tell people say, "How did you do it?" And what? How did you?
Were you the governor then?
Just after having been governor, when so I got through being governor January 1 of 2003, and March 21 of 2003, I went off to Nepal to climb Mount Everest. When I was running for re-election in New Mexico, my mother said, "Re-elect Gary so he won't go to Mount Everest and climb it, please." Anyway, it was a great experience. The whole thing has been a great experience. It's been a great way to see the planet. I'm not through seeing the planet, but that's been a terrific way to start out.
And not that you're preaching to other people, but what advice would you give to people who, some people think they're old at 55.
So this is advice I give to everybody. Really, it's putting one foot in front of the other. It's making decisions to change. If you want to change your life, as hard as it'll be to change your life, it'll never be easier than to do it tomorrow. So people ask me all the time, well, what's the difference between climbing Mount Everest and climbing up the highest mountain in Colorado? And my response is nothing. It's just one foot in front of the other, and it's just perseverance. It's being in good physical shape. Off camera, you asked me, well, what kind of shape did you have to be in to climb Mount Everest? I could climb Mount Everest tomorrow. I've made a pact to myself since 1987 to be as fit as I possibly can be every day of my life. So I'm as fit today as I've been in my entire life. Now the stopwatch shows a little bit of difference when it comes to the times, but that's where I'm at. But that's one of the important things in my life. And I'll just say, find out what's important in your life and get as much of it as you possibly can.
All right, Governor Gary Johnson.
Terry, thank
we
you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.